The winter sun hung low over Johannesburg, glowing like an ember through a veil of pale clouds. The streets buzzed with an energy the city hadn't felt in years. African flags fluttered across lampposts, banners adorned skyscrapers, and security checkpoints stretched along every major road. The world had arrived, leaders, diplomats, journalists, all flooding South Africa for a G20 summit unlike any other. But beneath the polished speeches and diplomatic courtesies, something deeper stirred. A quiet shift in global power was beginning to crystallize, forming not in the gilded halls of old empires, but in the ambitions of the global South. And at the center of that shift was the arrival of India's Prime Minister. The aircraft descended toward Tambo International Airport under heavy escort, moving through the crisp morning air with purposeful grace. On the tarmac, South Africa's president stood waiting, flanked by cultural performers dressed in vibrant traditional attire. The world's cameras zoomed in as the Indian and South African leaders exchanged a warm embrace, an image that would ripple across continents within minutes. For most viewers, it was just another diplomatic greeting. But for those attuned to the currents of change, it symbolized something else entirely: the emerging unity of the global South. Inside the secure motorcade weaving through Johannesburg, the Indian Prime Minister watched the passing neighborhoods, Soweto's murals, bustling markets, rows of small shops painted in bright colors. He wasn't here for optics. He was here because the world was changing, and Africa was no longer optional for global leadership. It was essential. South Africa's government had made it clear. This G20 summit would not be business as usual. It would be the first in history held under a shared African-Asian agenda, a coalition quietly engineered in months of late-night diplomacy between India, South Africa, Kenya, Brazil, and Indonesia. The goal was audacious: reshape the G20 conversation away from the self-interests of wealthy nations and toward the concrete needs of the global South: sovereign development, equitable markets, debt justice, climate adaptation funding, and technology transfer. And to everyone's surprise, India was leading the charge. That evening, in a discreet conference room at the Santon Convention Center, a closed-door meeting took place, one not listed on the official summit schedule. Around a circular table sat leaders from 14 African nations: India, Indonesia, and Brazil. The atmosphere was electric, charged with restless hope and frustration long suppressed. South Africa's president opened the discussion. "For decades," she said, "the world has told us to be patient, to wait for development to trickle down, to accept financial structures we didn't build. But Africa is the youngest continent in the world. We cannot spend the next century waiting for decisions to be made without us." Her voice resonated through the room. The Indian Prime Minister leaned forward, his tone calm yet firm. "This summit is our moment," he said. "The global South is rising, not as a block of protest, but as a block of purpose. If we stand together, we can reshape global governance, trade, technology sharing, climate financing. But unity must be deliberate, not symbolic." Kenya's president nodded. "The West sees Africa as a market, not a partner. If India stands with us, truly with us, then we can negotiate as equals." India's PM replied, "Not only stand with you, we grow with you. Africa's rise is India's rise." The room fell silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of the declaration. It wasn't diplomatic flattery. It was a geopolitical alignment. And quietly, a plan was drafted: a joint global South economic framework, a new technology-sharing pact, a Pan-African-Asian battery supply chain, a mutual climate resilience fund, a shared position for the G20 plenary. This was not a meeting. It was the birth of a new global axis. By morning, the world had already sensed a shift. Rumors swept the media rooms. Analysts speculated about a rising South-South coalition. Western diplomats whispered uneasily in their delegations. The summit's agenda, carefully managed by wealthy nations for decades, was slipping away from their grip. The opening ceremony revealed the change openly. As leaders filed into the magnificent hall, wearing suits, traditional fabrics, and cultural colors, the atmosphere carried a historical weight. When the South African president took the stage, her speech was sharper than many expected. For too long, global institutions have asked the global South to adapt to frameworks designed without us. Today we say, no more. Africa is not a passive recipient of the world's decisions. Africa is a driver of the world's future. Applause erupted from African and Asian delegations, while others shifted uncomfortably. But the true turning point came when the Indian Prime Minister approached the podium. He began softly. Friends, the world is at a crossroads. The old systems cannot solve new crises. Inequality, debt burdens, climate disasters, inequitable vaccines, technological monopolies. These are not challenges of the South alone. They threaten the entire world. He paused, letting the room still. But we, the global South, are ready to lead. We are not asking for favors. We are asking for fairness. And we will stand united to make it a reality. The hall erupted with applause, longer, louder, more confident than any leader had received that morning. The message resonated. India was signaling that leadership was shifting, not westward, not eastward, but southward. In the afternoon, diplomatic tensions surfaced. Three Western nations pushed back against the Global South's proposal for a new development financing model. They argued that existing institutions, the IMF and World Bank, were sufficient and that reforms must be gradual. African leaders were not impressed. A delegate from Nigeria spoke bluntly. Gradual reforms have kept Africa waiting for 70 years. That pace no longer serves our people. A foreign minister from Kenya added, if we cannot find justice here, then we will build new institutions ourselves. Privately, Western advisors fumed. The unity of the South had caught them off guard. For decades, they had counted on competing interests, fragmented blocs, fragile economies. But India's arrival had changed the equation. Even China, observing quietly, seemed unsettled, not by opposition, but by the emergence of a rival southern power center not under its sphere. Africa was forming its own geopolitical identity, and India was standing beside it, not overshadowing it. As evening fell, the Indian Prime Minister attended a Pan-African cultural night organized in Johannesburg. The gathering pulsed with drums, marimba, ululations, and laughter. Leaders spoke not of strategy, but of shared struggles and dreams. A minister from Ghana approached the Indian PM. Our grandparents fought colonialism with their hands, he said. We fight it with policy and unity. What you bring is not money or machines. It is respect. That is why Africa listens. The PM nodded. Respect is the foundation, he answered. Partnership is the path. Nearby, youths from across Africa, innovators, activists, academics, surrounded Indian scientists and diplomats, discussing agriculture tech, digital inclusion, renewable energy grids. This wasn't the diplomacy of treaties. This was the diplomacy of people. And it was here, in conversations under strings of lanterns, that the new global South found its heartbeat. The next day carried the summit's most dramatic moment. Inside the grand negotiation room, the floor opened for statements on global economic reform. One by one, Western countries defended the existing order. They warned against radical restructuring, cautioned about economic instability, and insisted on responsible development. Then Africa spoke, and the world listened. One African leader, calm yet unwavering, said, responsible development cannot exist when the system itself is irresponsible. We will no longer operate inside frameworks built to keep us peripheral. Africa will no longer negotiate for inclusion. We will shape outcomes. Following the African delegation, India took the floor. My colleagues, the PM began. Africa's voice is not a request to be accommodated. It is a reality to be acknowledged. The future of global growth lies in the global South, in its markets, its youth, its innovation, its resilience. We do not seek dominance. We seek balance. Shared prosperity is the only sustainable model. He then presented the South-South Blueprint, a unified policy platform developed in that unlisted roundtable. Its demands were bold: debt restructuring tied to development outcomes, not austerity; technology sharing with no monopolistic restrictions; climate justice funds governed by the Global South; African Union permanent seat in G20 governance; a new financial institution co-led by Africa and Asia. The room stiffened, but it was too late. Momentum had shifted. By the summit's final day, something extraordinary had happened. For the first time in G20 history, a shared Global South declaration was included in the final communiqué. It wasn't everything the group wanted, but it was more than anyone expected. Acknowledgement of Africa's right to structural economic reforms. Support for a new climate resilience fund co-managed by India and the AU and a commitment to explore equitable digital access models. The Western Bloc resisted, negotiated, watered-down sections, but they couldn't ignore the unity of the South. A new global balance had emerged. As the summit came to a close, the Indian Prime Minister joined South Africa as president at a small garden overlooking Johannesburg's skyline. The city lights shimmered against the dark sky. For a moment, both leaders simply stood in silence, absorbing the weight of the past few days. "It's only the beginning," she said softly. "Only the beginning," he echoed. They knew this summit was not a triumph, but an awakening. Not the end of a struggle, but the start of a movement. The global South had found its voice. Africa had claimed its agency. India had stepped into leadership, not as a superpower, but as a bridge. Together, they had shifted history's axis a few degrees southward. When the Indian delegation departed the next morning, thousands lined the road to the airport, students waving miniature flags, musicians playing, families cheering. The symbolism was unmistakable. A new partnership had been forged in the heart of Africa. A new vision had been born. A new global chapter had begun. This G20 summit would be remembered not for its press releases or galas, but for planting the seed of a new world, one where the South defined its own destiny. And as the aircraft lifted into the sky, carrying with it the hopes of two continents, the world below felt just a little different, tilted toward a future shaped not by old powers, but by rising ones. Africa and India were no longer waiting for the world to change. They were changing it themselves.